Hi, I'm Liv. Today I'll be reviewing this book, A Personal History by Katharine Graham. It's an autobiography, and Katharine was a publisher of the Washington Post for many years, and her family owned the paper before she worked there. Her father was the publisher before her and passed it down to her. The book goes through her life and her experience with the paper and what she learned through the position and kind of like how she grew into the person she was and her family's experiences owning the paper. This is my first time reading the book and I thought it was super interesting. So, first, I'm going to talk about some reporting lessons that I learned that I can apply to my own work. The first one was that Katharine stressed the importance of journalists always being curious and wanting to learn more. She had that characteristic herself, and I think that's like very important for all journalists to have. And she said this mindset helped her be more successful, and I think it's important to take into my own reporting. Another journalism lesson I think I can apply to my own work is that she stressed throughout the book that publications should be strong and not influenced by outside factors, and that they should serve their audience first. A quote that I pulled was, quote, "The newspaper's duty is to its readers and to the public at large, not to the private interest of its owner." I think, like, especially in these current times, it's important to remember this as, like, big monopolies are taking over newspapers, and I think, like, all reporters should remember this. The third reporting lesson that I learned was building good relationships and working well with like your counterparts. Katharine and her family worked to build a good team around them at the Post, and that benefited their success greatly. They often had like good friendships with the people they worked with, and that really showed in the work that they were putting out. Next, I'm going to talk about lessons that I learned throughout the book, and like takeaways throughout the book. So, first, my takeaway from the beginning of the book was the lesson to keep going at the beginning, even though a job might be hard. Katharine's first journalism job was really hard for her, and she struggled, and she almost quit journalism altogether. And then she decided not to, and she became a highly successful journalist. So it kind of shows to be resilient, even though it might be hard at the beginning of your career. A takeaway that I got from the middle of the book was to keep going through hardship and prioritize your mental health. Katharine's father passed away, and then her husband passed away, both in the middle of the book, and both like pretty close to each other, and that was like a very hard experience for her. And after this, she really like focused on and prioritized her mental health, because her husband died by suicide, and it was very sad. And so she made sure that she herself was working on her mental health. So I think that's like an important takeaway for journalists and for everybody. And then a takeaway I had from the end of the book was to have confidence and trust in yourself and to stand up for yourself. Katharine was very shy at the start of her career and the beginning of her life, but she learned to be more assertive, and it helped her be more successful. She said, quote, "We suffered, and many still do, from an exaggerated desire to please, a syndrome so instilled in women of my generation that it inhibited my behavior for many years." And the book also focuses on like women's roles throughout history and like how that played into her not being as assertive as she could have been. So in the end of the book, she kind of emphasized the importance of that. And I think all journalists should read this book because it gives very good historical insight to the industry. The book takes place between 1917 and 1997, and it includes lots of very important historical events like the Vietnam War, the Pentagon Papers, and Watergate. It also like talks about their coverage of Watergate, and Katharine was the publisher of the Washington Post during that very important piece and that very important time in history. It also features many very important historical figures like throughout all of those years that Katharine and her family were very involved with. Lots of like presidents and very important political figures. So that's really interesting to see, and I think like everyone can learn from that. Another reason why journalists should read this book is because it talks a lot about what goes on behind the scenes of the journalism industry. Because Katharine and her father were the publishers of the Post. And I don't think, like, I myself didn't really know what the background of those publications really looked like. And so it was very interesting for me. And the book shows what they had to go through to keep the paper in business. And I think it's a unique perspective for journalists to have because it's not something you really think about. Yeah. And overall, I would give the book 8 out of 10 oranges because it was very interesting and informative. I think sometimes it could be like, it was very long, so sometimes it was like a lot of information, but I think overall I really enjoyed, and it was a very cool perspective to have, and I learned a lot that I can apply to things that I do myself.